Hello folks, Halo here, and this is the updated Mana Guardian Cursebot for Path of Exile Crucible League. This build originally started because somebody in my Twitch chat was asking what they should play for a third man. If they're playing a duo and they just want to add a third person to make the party stronger. And I figured, you're playing an Inquisitor, so you probably don't want to go a full Cursebot, and just a Mana Guardian isn't that great. You can fit a lot more. Instead of getting like the last 20, 30, 40% of mana the Mana Guardian gets, you can get a lot more general things that benefit a party. So I threw together a build, made a video on it, and that was that. It was very experimental. It was very done as an afterthought. Turns out a lot of people played the build and liked it. So I figured that with Anathema being released, and with having had some experience from people who said they played it, I should rebuild everything from the ground up to rework it into something that's really nice. And I'm really happy with the way this build turned out. As it is, this character provides an enormous amount of buffs to your party. You should always play an Aurabot as the second person. This is not a replacement for an Aurabot build by any means. Aurabots are pretty broken. But this character manages to fit a ton of things into a single package. One of the things is we're using both link wheels as well as Soul Link to give both the other people in our party over 100% more EHP. Yes, with this buff effect, Soul Link is your other party members have more than 100% more EHP. Because of the way Soul Link buff effect scales, it's absolutely crazy. We also use the new movement speed mastery so that this character doesn't have to pick up any kind of movement speed or use a Quicksilver Flask. It's really nice. And then we can take this mastery that gives link skills, they link to an additional target. Because of this node here, we want to be using our link button every 4 seconds to keep this buff effect up. And this mastery means that if you're in a party, you can just press this button once and it'll automatically reattach to both. If you're playing with if you want a little bit more damage, this mastery is really good for builds that have a hard time getting exposure. It just depends on how you feel, if you want a little more damage or if you want a little bit more QOL. But in addition to Soul Link, we run Aegis Aurora on the endgame version of this character. We used to run Kingmaker. The item is ludicrously expensive, and even if it wasn't, I think this is just way better. The buff effect Soul Link makes your party basically immortal in many ways. It's absolutely crazy. So Aegis Aurora gives us the recovery to basically always be at full energy shield. You can see we're over 11,000 energy shield and capped block, nearly capped spell block. Getting those last few percents isn't actually worth it for the amount of passive points it would take. It would take a couple. But this means that damage that's being redirected into you, you're healing it really fast. You have 1500 energy shield regen. Anathema is, in my opinion, the most underrated unique in the entire game. In fact, every league, when Seek and I play, we try to buy things that we think will go up in price. The new league releases, you're like, oh, we were going to be farming currency days 1, 2, 3, 4. We should invest in something. This league, we invested in Anathemas. They were like 30, 40, 50, they're like 40, 50, 60 chaos on League Start. And we're like, this is crazy. This item is so broken. So we bought an entire tab of Anathemas. We started just buying, like 5, 10. But then we're like, this item's crazy. We got to buy more. We got a little bit of sunk cost fallacy going on. And so we thought it would be funny just to fill a tab. Turns out this item is still piss cheap. Nobody's using it. I don't understand why. This is basically enormous amounts of curses, even on normal builds that have like 1 curse. You socket this item, you grab a power charge, and now you're at 4 curses for 1 ring slot. It's crazy why people aren't using this item. This enables this character to have 6 curses very easily, and you can go up to 7 by changing your anointment to infused. You can go up to 9 by swapping out Aegis Aurora for the shield that gives you power charges. This item is nuts. This means that we don't have to run +1 curse gear, so we only use a ring slot. Chevron's Revelation is an absurd ring. You get 300 flat mana, which is 3/5 as good as a Replica Comb's Heart, and you get 6% of energy shield regen, and 73 intelligence, some energy shield on top of that. But the downside is you cannot regenerate mana. Now, the thing about this character is we have an enormous pool of mana, so the cost of our skills, we have like a bigger buffer. You know, like normal builds, they need to be constantly regenerating. My roommate's using a hairdryer. Sorry if that's a little annoying. Yeah, you don't need to be constantly regenerating mana up to a reservation, because you can just leave hundreds of mana unreserved, you know, and that's only 4%, right? So this character needs to get mana back, and there's many ways you can do this. The way that I think will be best overall is to use this curse mastery that recovers 1% of mana when you curse a non-cursed enemy. Basically, this means that when you're running around through a map, you have 13,000 max mana, so you're recovering 130 mana every time you're like basically on hit, right? If you find that's not enough, there are lots of ways you can go about mitigating your mana problem even further. You can reduce the mana cost with the mana mastery. You can get chance to recover 10% of mana over 1 second when you use a guard skill. Then you would just like put Molten Shell on left click and you'd run around recovering 1400 mana every time your guard skill goes off on an instant cast. We also have Battle Rouse, which gives us 10% of damage taken recouped as mana, which means that all the damage that's being redirected you through Soul Link and then like being mitigated by Aegis Aurora, that will be constantly refilling your mana as well. So you can also use a mana flask. There's flask slots open. It's very easy to do. Primal Spirit would give you mana on hit with attacks. Basically, with the buffer of mana we have, I think it'll be a non-issue. I haven't had a chance to actually build this character, but there's lots of options. And if you feel like you need a little bit more of a buffer, you can always like lower your clarity level. The only thing this clarity level does is reserve more mana so that you get more energy shield. You can see as I down level clarity here, our unreserved mana goes up, and so we're reserving less mana for this node on the Guardian tree that gives 10% of your reserved mana as energy shield. So you want to reserve as much mana as you can while still feeling good. So, you know, there's lots of ways to adjust the mana Guardian, or adjust the mana problem. Finally, I want this build to be fun to play and to feel good. So to that end, all 6 of these curses are applied by pressing a single button, and that button is also your attack that generates charges for your party through Harmony of Purpose. So we use Kinetic Bolt with GMP because even without investments into projectile speed, this just kind of hits everything on the screen in front of you in a big-ass cone. We use Hex Touch with Enfeeble because I think having a wider application of defensive curses is the most valuable. You know, if you think about when you're running a map, you want everything to be cursed with the defensive curse, right? You only really care about your offensive curses on like rares or beyond bosses or bosses otherwise. So to auto-apply curses, you the change that made it so like Blasphemy and Hex Touch and, you know, in Bane, they have like 35% less effective curses now. It's obviously bad. So we want to be applying our curses at full effect. So to that end, we're using Spellslinger. We socket 3 curses, generally our offensive ones. If you're playing in a Heat Shiver carry, you should always prioritize Frostbite as your elemental build. Otherwise, if your carry is doing a different type of damage, you can just use the elemental curse for whatever is highest for them. And then Punishment is just generically really good. So with these curses on Spellslinger, that means when you do your Kinetic Bolt attack, it just casts the spell right on top of the cursor. So you just walk around, click things, and they're cursed. We also use Mark on Hit. You know, you get a little bit less reduced effect, so it's a little bit less damage, but I think it more than makes up for it in the way it feels to just have a one button, everything is applied. Then Soul Link. You don't want to link. I mean, you can link increased duration to this if you want it to. If you want to, but generally you want to be pushing it quickly to reactivate this button here. Discipline. We run this just to have an extra use of Vaal Discipline for the party. Vaal Discipline is absolutely crazy. You just push this button and you can't die. For the duration of the buff. So if you ever see people's energy shield drop or it looks like scary things are happening, press Vaal Discipline. It's really great for everybody. And then finally, our last curse is being applied by Temp Chains. Now, I'm using Asenath because I think it's just generically the most powerful option you can get in a glove slot. What this item does is it makes enemies that you've cursed or enemies near corpses that you've cursed explode for 3% of their life. Now, if you're doing Magic Find, this might be a small reduction in the number of kills that the Magic Find carry gets. I don't think this number is very big, and I haven't had the time to test to see how it feels, but I think this should absolutely be completely fine, even in Magic Find, because corpse removal is amazing. Chances are, if you're going to die in maps, corpse exploding effects are one of the main things that can do that to players in general, like detonate dead strong boxes especially. Or even like the porcupine guys. Explode, like this isn't, the explode isn't the important line here. Be the curse on hit, the mana, and the blind, which is really nice. It's just another defensive layer, another debuff you apply, and then deleting corpses is what this item does. It's absolutely fantastic. If you play around with it and you find that you don't want to have Asenath because you think it's taking even a little bit of your Magic Find stats on your carry, you can just use like a Shaper's Touch or something that's corrupted. It doesn't have to be with Temp Chains either, although I think Temp Chains is best because I think you want to be applying your defensive curses as broadly as possible, where, you know, if you get like a pair of gloves with LE weakness on hit, then you would swap LE weakness for Temp Chains, but that would mean that you're only cursing your defensive curse on a single target with Spellslinger. We don't actually have a ton of area of effect on these curses. I think that's fine personally, but you can always index a little bit more into AoE for curses with like these nodes here. But yeah, this character has turned out to be extremely powerful. This should feel very good to play. One thing we're doing is running a Brutal Restraint here. This gives us like 50, yeah, this gives us like 50 dexterity-ish, and dexterity is a stat, because we're running all these uniques and we don't have slots free, getting dexterity is hard to get, so it saves us a passive point or two taking like the agility nodes. You can also get some really nice like just finding one with dexterity and where is it? Alchemist Genius. Alchemist Genius is just better flask sustain. You can find this for probably less than a divine. It's not important. The main thing is getting dexterity, and then because we're an Aegis based character, we don't really want to be evading things. Now, it's not worth converting our evasion rating into armor, because getting iron reflexes is really hard. Like if you can do that off of a crucible passive or something, if that's an option, that's great. But we don't necessarily want to run a Jade Flask or anything. You can absolutely run a triple LE Flask, and that's what I would do. Just swap this out for fuck, I am very tired. Topaz, Ruby, and Sapphire Flask. Yes, that's it. Now that'll make your uptime on these flasks go down a little bit if you're doing bossing or other content. If you're doing simulacrums, I do triple LE Flask. Otherwise, it's preference and you just unspec Trader. But the Jewel for dexterity and, you know, the flask sustain on getting Alchemist Genius is really nice. So if you want to just run a normal Jewel here, untick this, run the LE Flasks, and then just compensate your attributes elsewhere. Perfectly fine thing to do. Healthy Mind down here, this makes these 5% life nodes 10% mana nodes, and 10% mana nodes are better than like the 8% nodes that we'd have the option of taking here, like the 8% node here. So this Jewel just having 20% mana on it and getting some value off the travel nodes is great, but that just gives us some places to put our extra points. You know, if you're not at a level 100, then you just untick the bonus mana nodes here. You know, now you're closer to level 30, 95. All right, so all that said, I have also added a leveling setup, a early mapping setup, and a pre-Aegis Anathema setup to this character as well, because I wanted it to be much easier to access for people. A lot of people ask how they should level this character. So we'll go to the leveling setup here. It's very simple. You can level a Guardian in many ways. Armageddon Brand Cremation, Righteous Fire, I just did Spark. I know how to play Spark. I've played Spark a ton. I can build this tree in my sleep, do the links and passive tree in my sleep. It's very second nature at this point, just because of how much time I've spent doing Templar area Spark characters at this point. So, same thing as the normal Inquisitor. You run, you grab your Templar nodes, you grab a Yo, you go Heart and Soul. Karoo Ward is the best Spark leveling item in the game if you can manage it. Orb of Storms, Herald of Thunder Clarity, very straightforward. Same thing as you go up in the leveling tree, pick up Duration, Life. eventually, about leveling 3, and this is, close to Act 10, when you're about level 60. This is where it gets a little more interesting. We come over and we pick up Whispers of Doom. And we also buy Dodri's Damning. Now, these rings are like 1 alch or 1c items. You can get them for very cheap. And so this is where we start to run 4 curses. We do 3 on Bane, Ellie Weak, Conductivity, and Enfeeble, because those are generally the best, and then we just manually cast Sniper's Mark. So this is still a completely viable solo character. You can finish the campaign at this point. If you want a little bit more damage, you can take Heart of Thunder, Breath of Lightning, and even do maps early on yourself by filling it out. Leercast is also pretty cheap. If it's like a Chaos, and you're running with your party, it's well worth. It's damage to you and extra damage to your carry, as well as getting life and mana on top and in Dexterity. It's a very good item if you can just pick it up. But then we get into our maps version. This is where we're still using Bane to apply Triple Curse. We add our Kinetic Bolt, Hex Touch, Enfeeble GMP setup. That's generating charges off Harmony of Purpose for us. We're not like a solo capable damage character anymore. This is where you have a little bit of flexibility. The reason Hatred is in here is because at this point in maps, your carry should have Call of the Brotherhoods, right? So they should be converting their damage to cold and be Heat Shiver Gaming, but the Aurabot doesn't have a 4th damage aura yet, so the Aurabot's going to be running Haste, Zealotry, and Wrath. This is where you just get to run a 50% aura that isn't being run by your Aurabot or your carry, so you do Hatred here. If you're playing, supporting a different build, or your Aurabot's running Hatred but not running Haste, this is just a flex slot. Put a 50% aura here that benefits your party that other people don't have. Dread Banner is actually pretty good. It, giving nearby allies 21% less accuracy rating makes your evasion go that much farther. We link it to increased area of effect to make it feel a little bit better, and also to reserve more mana. Because remember, we want to be reserving as much of our mana as we can to get the most energy shield possible for the allies. We also use Aspect of the Spider. You can just beastcraft this as a suffix on anything. And this version we pick up, you just buy a Vol Regalia that has energy shield and mana if you can. This should be like 10 chaos. Nobody wants random body armors that don't have like a 6-link. But we're not a solo character, so we don't care. We don't need a 6-link. And we get our early items. We use the old curse items to up our curses to, I believe it's 6 at this point. So we are 6 curses with about 7,000 mana. So we're scaling into our full potential. The Pre-Aegis Anathema setup. This is your sort of in-game setup, but you don't have Aegis and Anathema because those items aren't likely to be cheap or available in like the first day of a league. The entire time we're also running Perkle's Toe. This item just says your carry, if they're lightning damage, deals 30% more damage. So it's an enormous amount of value. Early on, like the duo setup, the Aurabot runs this, and like the PoBs and stuff. If you have a Mana Guardian, your Aurabot doesn't need to run Perkle's Toe, so that lets your Aurabot free up an amulet slot. If for whatever reason you are playing with a carry that's not lightning damage, you just run Adziri's Foible here for extra mana, and that's a perfectly good option. It gives you reduced attribute requirements on skills and items, which makes up for the loss of the dexterity, so it's overall Perkles is the best option all the way through in-game, just to give you a carry the 30% more damage there. Alright, what else we have? What else do we have? This character doesn't have Aegis, so we actually are running a Jade Flask here just because we want to evade more. I think that's about it. Memory Vault is just an insane item, gives you a ton of armor, gives you a ton of energy shield, gives you, gives you a ton of mana. Pretty best in slot for Aurabot setups. And onto the in-game thing, in-game setup, one last thing I wanted to note. There are alternatives to doing Spellslinger. One thing you can do is use a Poet's Pen here, and Poet's Pen lets you auto cast spells as well. Like the big problem with having a ton of curses is how do you apply them, right? You don't want to manually cast them, you don't want to Arcanist brand them because that's very clunky. So Poet's Pen is another way you can auto-proc or auto-trigger spells. You can socket a Poet's Pen and auto-proc up to 3 more spells as long as you get a source of additional power charges. It's a perfectly fine option that also frees up reservation to like reserve determination of your own. If for whatever reason you don't have an Aurabot around, you'd want to have determination there, and you wouldn't want to be reserving the mana on Spellslinger. As it is, because this character has an Aurabot, your reservation is pretty worthless because the Aurabot is just going to do all of that better. So yeah, that's the character. It's been drastically improved. It should feel way better to play. It's definitely way stronger. It's been optimized to just be a much better character overall. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I'll be happy to hear how it goes for you. One last thing I want to mention is, if you're playing with a third person, you have to pick the ascendancy they want to play. So it is completely fine to play this character with the Spark Duo setup, and if you're inexperienced and you don't know how to build and adjust builds on your own, it will still by far be your best experience to play that character, because that character is so well refined. The progression stages are so well laid out. Everything is very optimized for budget and accessibility. But your carry will need to unspec Inevitable Judgment and then spec into Augury of Penitence. This node is anti-synergy with a Cursebot because you're going to be reducing the enemy's resists, and this node makes your carry ignore the enemy's resists. If you ignore the negative resist, then you deal less damage. Augury of Penitence is a perfectly fine node. It gives your carry a little extra damage and makes nearby enemies deal less elemental damage. So this is actually a defensive boost for the party. Also, Hierophant is tied for like your best in slot ascendancy for transitioning into late game. So if the idea is you want to be as strong as possible eventually, then you can swap out of Inquisitor and just play the carry as a Hierophant once you have currency to burn into scaling Arcane Surge effect. And you'll be just as good, just as well off as playing an Assassin, basically. But I've also made this PoB. It doesn't have any leveling information. It's just an in-game tree. This was kind of a fun project. I wanted to make a carry that is basically the best possible at its budget level for playing in a 3-man. His character is kind of insane. Assassin I don't like in general. I don't think it's a very good ascendancy, but when you already have 2 party members solving all of your problems for you as a carry, it starts to win by default. It's pretty straightforward. We stack triple cluster jewels because we want as much projectile speed as possible. We are Heat Shiver Gaming. I'm going to change the PoB to change this jewel to a Inner Conviction node, Inner Conviction Timeless Jewel, to get Inner Conviction on this keystone here. This jewel is actually slightly more damage, assuming because you lose the frenzy charges that you get from your Mana Guardian. But swapping this over to Inner Conviction will let you click on Eater or the Alter mods that give you reduced defense per frenzy charge. So in the absence of everything else, it's going to feel a little bit better to just have one less thing to worry about. Both are completely viable options, however. Gear is very straightforward. Nebulus's Call of the Brotherhoods, it builds itself. Coward's Chains lets us run Pain Attunement for 30% more spell damage. We run Righteous Fire with Zealot's Oath. Incandescent Heart is 25% less elemental damage taken, as well as a lot of damage. This item has problems when you are playing in a duo because it doesn't give you anywhere near as much durability. Well, it does, but I'm not going to get into it. It's very complicated. I could talk about Incandescent Heart in a duo for way too long, and I have to go pretty soon here. We use a Strangle Grasp on this character just to anoint a bunch of notables around the tree that gives us a ton of value. This is just a really cool character. I'll include this PoB in the description. But like I said, this is more for people who don't need help leveling a character, who know that they can reach the point where they're playing this and just want to play something that's absolutely absurd later on. If you are newer, you're inexperienced, you just play the Inquisitor. It's still completely fine. And yeah, that's the Mana Guardian Cursebot guide for Crucible League. Hope you guys enjoy it. Yeah, we're hard at work getting the other guides out as quick as possible. They're all finished, and they should be done later today before League starts. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.